have been an avid reader since middle school and junior high. Nearly every night of my childhood, I would open up a new chapter and discover a world of excitement and wonder. I followed characters who ventured through fantastic lands and scenarios. I cheered on romances, cried over characters' deaths, and was inspired by incredible heroes. These experiences sound like one that any reader would have. But the problem was, I didn't consider myself a reader until well after high school. You see, I wasn't reading novels. I was reading manga. Fast forward to the past 2 years I've spent substitute teaching. I would often frequent this junior high school that had a mandatory study period in which students either had to work on homework or read. Of course, a lot of my students decided to use this time to be truant instead. To combat this, I created what I like to call my You Have No Excuse bag. The You Have No Excuse bag contains 9 manga volumes that I bought used off of Amazon based on what I knew my students were reading already. I would say to them, you have no excuse, you have to read something. Here's a bag full of manga. Go pick and choose. Unfortunately, the past came back to haunt me, and many of my students told me that they did not consider manga to be real reading. In fact, the educational system that kept track of the progress of their reading did not even take graphic novels and manga into account. Some teachers even commended me on my willingness to read manga, as though reading manga was something I only did to connect with my students, not a hobby that I just happened to share with them. As an avid manga reader and English education student faced with these challenges, I often ask myself, does manga have a place in the American classroom? And if it does, what might it look like? First, we should discuss exactly what manga is. Manga, or Japanese comics read from right to left, have recently surged in popularity in the United States. Dragon Ball, Naruto, Sailor Moon, and other series have dominated Western culture, bringing with them a new and easier form of access to comics and graphic novels. For most of comics' existence in our popular culture, superheroes have been the most prevalent of characters. But if you wanted to read Batman, where would you begin? Batman has had many different writers with countless reinterpretations of the character. Manga series, on the other hand, usually retain the same author throughout the course of a story's lifetime. Naruto, for example, has only ever had one author. To read Naruto, one only needs to pick up the first volume and be guaranteed to have a consistent experience until its end. Manga, therefore, has been more available to young readers outside of the classroom with its accessibility and its slew of adolescent protagonists. Going back to my You Have No Excuse bag as an example, 7 out of 9 of these books have preteen or teenage protagonists. But manga in particular has had some strengths and weaknesses with cultural awareness. John Lowe of Savannah College of Art and Design once described Americans' views of comics as a whole as fodder for children. This attitude began to shift with the success of superhero film adaptations such as the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Manga and Japanese literature are finding their own successes in adaptations such as The Edge of Tomorrow from the light novel and then manga adaptation of All You Need Is Kill, and more recently the film adaptation of the classic manga Ghost in the Shell. But one startling note is that in these adaptations, ethnicities of characters were changed to fit Western settings. I faced my own cultural awareness issue when introducing the age-appropriate series of Yotsuba and into my no excuse bag. Students of mine had difficulties reading its first chapter, which alone introduces at least 10 Japanese concepts that an unfamiliar reader would have difficulties with. It is in this struggle that I am empathetic as to why teachers typically do not use manga in the American classroom. As Diane, Lapp, and her colleagues discovered in their study, graphic novels, what elementary teachers think about their instructional value, most teachers were open to the idea of using graphic novels in the classroom, but never actually implemented them. After all, in order to introduce manga in particular to students, some scaffolding would be needed to not only familiarize students with basic cultural differences, but to teach how to read graphic novels in the first place, and then teach manga's unique right-to-left reading format. However, these challenging steps could provide extraordinary benefits. As Robin A. Moeller in the May and June 2016 issue of the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy says, I argue that graphic novel reading is not necessarily more or less difficult than traditional reading. Rather, graphic novel reading is a different way of reading than traditional reading. Students are constantly exposed to different forms of literacy through social media, movies, television programs, video games, and more. Multimodal reading prepares students to critically read all forms of media, not just standard print text, and manga is a medium that many students are already familiar with. As a side example, manga has been especially helpful for students with autism spectrum disorder, as discussed by Robert Rozema in the September 2005 issue of the English Journal. He argues that the simplistic faces and emotions featured in Japanese manga help adolescents with ADS empathize better with manga than they would with diverse faces and emotions shown in American comics. Manga certainly has benefits in education, but cultural barriers and other roadblocks still may prevent it from reaching classrooms in the near future. In spite of many setbacks, what might reading manga in a classroom look like? The best example I could find is A Silent Voice by Yoshitoki Oima. It is an Eisner-nominated manga that I think would work very well in a high school classroom. It is the story about a bully who seeks the friendship and forgiveness of a girl with hearing loss that he tormented in their childhood. The manga touches on themes of bullying, disability, and friendship. Unfortunately, the most poignant part of the story, where the bully admits to the victim that their problems would not have occurred had he bothered to listen to her voice, referring to the title, is in the very beginning of the second volume. So a classroom would have to obtain physical or digital copies of both the first and second volume for a thorough read. This issue could be solved with the 61-page pilot chapter that was initially published as a test run for the series, but this pilot chapter is not available for an English release. Despite these problems, A Silent Voice provides an example of what I believe could be manga's inclusion in the classroom. Manga has profound cultural and multimodal benefits. However, it's something that some students may only see in their personal daily lives. But just because manga doesn't have a place in the current classroom doesn't mean that it doesn't have a place in the school library. Libraries are a great way to allow students to have access to manga without manga ever touching school curriculum. Some titles I have for recommendation are the aforementioned A Silent Voice, Fullmetal Alchemist, the early volumes of One Piece, and, for younger readers, Yotsuba and. I look forward to the day that manga has a place in the classroom, but we still have a long way to go. Thank you so much for watching my video. Until next time, this is CJ, signing off.